Oh, my dear, come sit here by Grandma. Today my heart is full of memories. Memory is a funny thing. Sometimes it disappears for days, and suddenly, it comes back all at once, like a gust of wind opening the windows of the soul. And today, just today, it came back. I don't usually talk about these things, not because I don't want to, but because some memories sting more than an open wound. And my story, my story is not one of those you see on television. It's real life, with dirt floors, pots bubbling on the stove, and tears hidden behind the door. Are you curious to find out how it all happened? Then subscribe to the channel now and leave a comment telling me where you're listening to this story from. I love to know where you're following me from. And look, if I were you, I wouldn't miss what's coming up. The truth I'm about to reveal will move you in ways you can't even imagine. Are you ready? I was just a girl when it all began. In a little town, the kind with a church in the center square, a bell that rang at dusk, and the smell of fresh bread floating out from the homes. Women wore dresses down to their ankles, and men tipped their hats when they greeted you. The world was different back then. It seemed simpler, but it wasn't lighter. I remember the dress my mother sewed for me, red calico with blue flowers, and I thought I was the prettiest thing God ever made. Beauty back then was rare and costly. We made miracles with what little we had. Shoes were passed down from older sisters, and ribbons in the hair were only for Sunday Mass. My father, a man with calloused hands, worked in the fields. He left before the sun rose and came back when the stars were already stitched across the sky. My mother was the heart of the home. She cooked, cared for us, sewed clothes for others, and still found time to pray. I grew up seeing love in silence, strength in patience. Women back then didn't raise their voices. They endured. It was there, among the banana trees in the yard and the smell of coffee strained through a cloth filter, that my life began. And it was there, too, that I met him, the most handsome young man in the village, tall, dark, with a smile that could stop the sun. Oh, how my heart would race when he walked by. I would squint my eyes, trying to hold on to that moment forever. And maybe I did, because even now I remember it as if it were yesterday. He looked at me in a way no other girl was ever looked at. He called me princess and said my hands were like an angel's. Foolish I was, or maybe just innocent. Back then, girls were raised to marry. No one talked about dreams, or study, or freedom. A woman's fate was the altar, the ring, and then the stove. And so it went. I married him on a sunny Sunday. The church was full, all eyes on me. My parents cried with emotion, and I cried too, but from fear. A fear I would only understand later. A fear I swallowed with a smile so as not to ruin the celebration. Because a proper girl didn't complain, didn't doubt, didn't say no. My trousseau was embroidered by hand, each stitch full of hope. I walked into that house thinking I had gained the world. But it was only the beginning. What no one knew, not even I, was that this man with the charming smile carried a pride as big as the sky. A pride that turned into weight and then iron. And little by little, I disappeared. First I stopped laughing out loud, then I stopped singing while cleaning the house. Then I stopped dreaming altogether. But that's part of the rest of the story. Today I just wanted to tell you how it all began. And it began like this, with a calico dress, a heart full of hope, and a man who died thinking he had won. Yes, my dear. After we got married, I thought life would be sweet, like the cakes my mother used to bake on Sunday afternoons. We had almost nothing. Just a wood-burning stove, a creaky wooden bed, and a trunk with the few clothes I brought from my parents' home. But I was happy, or at least I thought I was. A young woman's hope makes a lot of noise inside, even when the world around her is silent. He used to take me to the market with his arm around mine. He'd buy a single red apple just for me, a rare thing back then, you wouldn't know. And I, foolish girl, even kept the little paper it came wrapped in, still smelling sweet. We'd sit on the doorstep at night and look up at the stars, and he'd say he would give me a house with a porch and a tiled floor. I believed him, believed like a child believes in shooting stars. It wasn't all pretty, of course. We argued over small things, burnt beans, bread running out before the week's end, a missing kitchen towel. But then he'd joke, call me my little love, and I'd forget everything. Because in the beginning, we think love is that, forgiving fast, staying quiet, even faster. In the village where we lived, The women always had one hand on their aprons and the other near the stove. I became one of them. Made coffee at dawn, swept the yard, washed clothes by the riverbank, scrubbing so hard my skin would burn. When he came home, he wanted hot food, silence in the house, and the laughter of children, even before they existed. And I gave him everything, with my hands, my feet, and my soul. The first months flew by. I waited for him to return from the fields, like I waited for the sun to rise. When he walked through that door, I forgot the tiredness, forgot the loneliness. He brought me wildflowers, and I'd put them in a glass by the window as if they were a bride's bouquet, and the window smiled, and so did I. One day, I remember it clearly, he came home with a bar of blue soap and a cut on his arm. He said the boss was cruel, that the world was heavy. I bandaged it with a clean cloth and kissed the wound. "It will pass," I said. And at that moment, I thought love was that, caring without measure, even when the other doesn't know how to say thank you. I dreamed of the future. I dreamed of barefoot children running through the yard, of a house filled with the smell of food, of him coming home late, tired, but happy. I dreamed of new dresses, even if stitched from scraps. I dreamed of us with gray hair, sitting side by side watching grandchildren play. But the dreams of poor women are sewn with weak thread. One tug, and they come undone. And the tugs, oh, the tugs began to come. But that's for another day. Today, I just wanted to remember that time when my heart still believed. A time when one smile from him was enough to brighten my whole morning. When I had so much hope, I thought the world itself could change, if we just loved hard enough. And I did love, as only a whole woman knows how to love. 3 Yes, my dear. After a while, the sparkle began to fade, but not all at once. It was like a candle slowly dimming, the flame trembling until it was only smoke. I took a while to notice. Women take time. We think it's normal, that every marriage has its ups and downs. And it does. But what started happening wasn't just that. It was erasure, a vanishing of myself inside myself. At first, it was just glances, the kind that say nothing, but make you quiet. If I talked too much at the table with neighbors, he'd frown. If I laughed a little too loud, he'd clear his throat. Once, I told a childhood story, and he cut me off with, "No one cares about that nonsense, woman." The table went silent. So did I. He never had to raise his hand. He never did. His silence weighed more than shouting. Contempt. Oh, my dear. Contempt is a kind of violence that leaves no mark on the skin, but scratches the soul from the inside. And I, who had been all light in the beginning, slowly dimmed myself so I wouldn't disturb him. He began deciding everything. What clothes I could wear, when I could go out, even the tone of my voice. Once I went to help at Mass, and he said, "Why stick your nose where it doesn't belong?" I shrugged and said I was only helping, and he just gave me that sideways look. That look, I still remember. I started walking with smaller steps, speaking softly, laughing less. I'd look at myself in the mirror and not recognize the face looking back. My hair always pinned up, my dress always dark, my lips rarely smiling. My friends from the village slowly disappeared too. "That one talks too much," he'd say. "The other is too bold." And so, I ended up alone. Alone in the house, alone within myself. One day, I sat on the edge of the bed and cried without making a sound. So I wouldn't wake him, so I wouldn't scare anyone. It was a small, hidden cry, the cry of someone who doesn't fully understand what they're losing, but already feels it slipping away. My mother looked at me with sadness. She knew. Mothers always know. But back then, a mother didn't say, "Leave him." She said, "Stay strong, daughter. Every marriage has its burden." And I stayed. Out of fear, out of shame, out of love, I don't know. Maybe all of them together. Today, looking back, I see how it all started small. A comment, a disguised command, a hard silence, and we accept it. We bend, like clay in the hands of someone who presses, and when you realize, you no longer know what shape you used to be. But God is my witness. In silence, I endured. Even quiet, I never stopped being who I was inside. I kept my thoughts, my dreams, my little joys hidden in corners only I knew, because a woman may go quiet, but she never truly disappears. She hides, yes, but she stays there, alive, waiting for the right moment to remember who she's always been. 4 years passed, my dear, and I grew quieter. Not out of cowardice. Don't think that. I stayed quiet out of love for the children, out of respect for the home, out of fear of shattering the little piece I still managed to hold together with my bare hands. Women in my time didn't scream, didn't run away, didn't leave. They stayed. They swallowed the burning, smiled with dry lips, and carried on. There came a time I felt like I might disappear for good, disappear like a color fading from fabric. I would wake, make coffee, tidy the house, care for the children, prepare lunch. Life was a colorless repetition, the same embroidery of day after day, always with the same stitches. Serve, be silent, endure. And you know what's the cruelest part? No one noticed. No one asked, "Are you okay, woman?" No one said, "You need a rest." To everyone, I was just the housewife, so-and-so's wife, the boy's mother. But who I was, not even I remembered anymore. There were days I'd speak to myself in my head, stirring the pot of beans. I'd ask, "Is this really it? Is this the life God meant for me?" But then a child would cry, or I'd hear the sound of his hoe in the yard, and I'd return to the routine like someone returning to a prison. A prison with no bars, but walls made of silence. I remember one winter, terribly cold. We were nearly out of firewood. He brought a small bundle and said, "This has to last until Sunday." And I made it last. We slept cold. The children curled up, and I woke up again and again to cover them with whatever we had left. He slept like a rock. He never knew what it took to keep that house warm with almost nothing. And when I got sick, oh my dear, there was no rest. High fever, chills, aching bones, and still, the water on the fire, the house swept, the clothes washed, because a strong woman doesn't stop. That's what they taught us. But the truth is, we did stop, on the inside. Outside, I smiled. I welcomed guests with fresh coffee and cornmeal cake. Inside, it was quiet crying, an exhaustion with no name. And him? He thought everything was fine, that I was made for that my silence meant gratitude. He never knew my silence was resistance. It was what was left to keep me from breaking. The children grew up watching it all, and even though I never said a word, I know they felt it. They felt the absence of tenderness between their father and me. They felt the tightness in my hugs, as if I were pouring everything into them, so that love would not be missing, even if everything else was. Those were years of being invisible. But even if no one saw it, I fought. I fought in silence. I fought standing, because being a woman in those times, it was a silent war, but a war nonetheless. 5. You know, my dear, everything that man had, everything built around his name, had my hands at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end. But no one saw it, not even him. He thought it was all his merit, a man's work, the sweat of someone who left early and came home late. And yes, he worked, but what he couldn't see was that, while he was gone, I stayed, and I was the one who kept everything standing. That house they now call his legacy. I was the one who wiped the mud from the first tile, who spent nights sewing the curtains from scraps of old sheets, who made the wood stove work with 2 sticks and a prayer, who hung the wet clothes on the wire, even with the cold wind freezing my bones. The yard, they say, was so pretty. It was my broom that swept it, the rose garden he used to show off to others, as if it were his. I planted those flowers, watered them, spoke to every sprout. Yes, because flowers respond to care, just like people, and he never knew how to care for anything gently. Only I did. The feast table at year's end. It was my hands that kneaded the bread, my oven that baked the cakes, my burned fingers stirring the sweets until just right, and everyone would praise him, call him a lucky man. They had no idea that his luck was me. When he bought the first radio, people said it was because he was clever, good with business, but the money came from selling my embroidery. Every flower I stitched into a pillowcase, every edge I decorated on cloth was turned into coin. And that coin became a radio, became food, became shoes for the children. And that fence he built, marking the land as his, it was made from wood I helped carry, with wire I cut with trembling hands. And him? He'd say, "It's good to have a strong wife." And he thought that was a compliment. But strength, my dear, I had because I had to, not because I wanted to. The children's clothes were sewn by me, even their toys, corncob dolls, tin can carts, little cloth horses. I wanted them to laugh, even without luxury. I wanted them to know that a mother's love stitches joy even with a short thread. And their studies? I was the one who taught them their first letters with a tiny pencil and an old notebook. I'd sit on the floor and say, A is for affection, B for bravery, C for courage. Because if I couldn't give them the world, I could at least give them words. So yes, he had. He built. He was called a man of worth. But if you look closely, very closely, you'll see everything bore my touch. My hands, my hidden sweat along the edges. But back then, they never said a woman achieved anything. They said she helped, but I know what I did. I know what was mine, even if my name was never written on it. 6. There was a day, my dear. One of those days that seems ordinary to everyone else, but for me, it was the beginning of another life. There was no party, no tragedy, no important guest. Just an ordinary late afternoon, with the scent of freshly washed laundry and a pot simmering on the stove. But something inside me woke up. I remember it as if it were now. I was sweeping the yard, an old broom made of twigs scraping the dirt with that dry, scratchy sound. The sun was setting slowly, painting everything orange, and suddenly I stopped. I just stopped, leaned the broom against the wall and stared up at the sky. It wasn't exhaustion, and it wasn't sadness either. It was a different kind of emptiness, a silence coming from deep within, asking, "Who are you?" If he left today, what would remain? If the children grow and go, what will be left of you? At that moment, I realized it had been a long time since I'd been myself. I had become just a role, so-and-so's wife, the boy's mother, the woman of the house. But my name, my soul, where had they gone? I went inside and looked at myself in the mirror, that cracked little mirror hanging on the kitchen wall, and saw a woman I no longer recognized, a face lined with time, tired eyes, colorless lips, but deep in the eyes, in the very back, there was still a spark, a quiet, stubborn glimmer, like an ember hiding beneath ashes. That's when I understood. I was still alive, not just breathing, alive. There was still something inside me, thoughts, memories, desire. I sat on the kitchen bench and cried, quietly where no one could see. But it wasn't sorrowful crying. It was the cry of someone meeting herself again. I was finally finding myself, and it hurt. Oh, it hurt. Because realizing you've lost yourself is painful, but it's also the first step to rising again. From that day on, I started paying attention to myself. I began brushing my hair with care, putting on a little lipstick, even if it was just for staying home, listening to my music when he was gone, writing poems on scraps of old paper bags. I began speaking to God differently, not just asking for strength to endure, but thanking Him for helping me remember myself. And you know what else? I started saying no, very softly at first, almost a whisper. I don't want that. I won't go today. I didn't like that. And each no was a door opening back into myself, a piece I recovered. No one noticed, not even him, because I kept doing the same things, the food, the home, the children. But now there was a difference. I was doing it for me, with awareness, not blindly, but by choice. And then, my dear, then I started to remember who I was, the girl who danced alone in the backyard, the young woman who dreamed of a bigger world, the woman who embroidered not only cloth, but also a future. It took time, years, but that simple late afternoon, broom in hand and sky glowing orange, that's when I was born again. 7. He passed on a cold morning, my dear. No warning, no goodbye, just that strange silence that enters the house before sunrise, a still wind, a heaviness in the air. I woke up with a tightness I couldn't place. I went to light the fire, start the coffee like I did every day, and found it odd he hadn't gotten up yet. He always rose early, before the rooster's first song. I called him. Once. Twice. Nothing. When I stepped into the bedroom, he was there, quiet, eyes closed, with a calmer face than I had ever seen. He looked asleep, but he wasn't breathing. And in that moment, my child, my body didn't shake, my eyes didn't cry. I stood still, staring at him, dishcloth still in my hand. It was strange. Not pain. Something else. It was an old emptiness that suddenly had a name. I went to the window and opened it. The day hadn't properly begun. The sky was in that state, just before first light, gray, nearly blue, with the smell of dawn. I leaned against the frame and took a deep breath. For the first time in a long time, the house was truly silent. No heavy footsteps, no tension in the air, no criticism, only the sound of my own thoughts. And do you know what I thought? He died thinking he had won. Yes, thinking the house was his, that the children were his reflection, that everything here existed because of him. He died not knowing that the real strength lived in me. Neighbors came, relatives, all saying, he was a strong man. He built everything with his bare hands. He will be missed. I listened in silence, served coffee, sliced bread, as always. But inside, I was screaming. It was my hands too, my pain, my silence. When they hugged me and said, "I'm so sorry," I simply replied, "He's at peace." And no one understood what I meant by that. I buried him with respect, in the clothes he liked most, with the prayers he never said. But I didn't cry that day. The tears came later, alone, at a different time, when the house suddenly felt too big. Because even if his absence didn't hurt the way they expected, the new silence was frightening. It was as if suddenly there was too much space. But that day, that cold morning beneath a colorless sky, that was when the world looked at me, but didn't yet see. But that part, that's what comes next. Because that day, my child, he left, never knowing that it was I who held everything together. 8. After he was gone, the house felt big, not in size, in space, in echo. It was as if time had slowed down, the hours dragged, and the silence was so deep I could hear the sound of memory. At first it felt strange. His absence didn't make noise. It made lack, but not the lack of a partner, not of laughter. It was the absence of a presence that had always taken up space, even when he didn't speak. Little by little, I began discovering what was left, and what was left was me. I saw that the house ran on my hands, that the bills were still paid because I knew where every little coin was tucked away, that the children came to me, not out of habit, but for guidance. And it was in that silence that truths began to show themselves. First came the silent recognition, the way the neighbors started looking at me, like people who suddenly realize you've been there all along, but only now truly see you. Some even apologized with their eyes. Others began to say things like, "Miss Maria, you're so strong. I don't know how you managed. It was you keeping it all together, wasn't it?" I just gave a soft smile. I didn't need to say a thing, because time speaks, and time, my dear, is the greatest revealer there is. Then came the papers, the documents, the inheritance, the land, the deed to the house, all in his name, of course. But the one who knew what was valuable and what wasn't was me. The one who remembered where the fence deed was, the water rights note, the receipt for the plow, was me. His family, at first, tried to interfere, wanted to decide, divide, dictate. But when they realized nothing moved without me, they backed off, because I was the living memory of that place. I was the key to everything that had been built. And then came something beautiful, respect, not imposed, not demanded, but that quiet kind of respect that is born from recognition, from realizing that, in silence, I had always been the foundation. I began walking differently, not with arrogance, with lightness. It was the first time in many years that my feet stepped on that floor as the owner, truly, not as the wife of the owner, but as the woman who had held it all together. And I understood in that silence that the world takes time to see a woman, but one day, it does. 9. Ah, my dear, it was beautiful, and at the same time, bittersweet, to see how only after his passing people truly began to see me, as if I had been there all along, in flesh, sweat, and silence. But only in his absence did the world open its eyes. Slowly, everything I did began to be noticed. The food that used to just appear on the table was now called a masterpiece. The garden, once merely decorative, became a symbol of care. The house they used to say was his became ours, and later, mine. Even the children began to look at me differently. Not out of disrespect before, they never treated me poorly. But it was as if, until then, they'd only seen me through their father's eyes. And now, at last, they were seeing me with their own. One day, the eldest pulled me aside and said, "Mom, I never noticed how you endured so much in silence, how you made everything happen." I just smiled, because the kind of recognition that comes from a child feels like rest. Even the daughters-in-law began to listen to me differently. Before, they thought I was just an old-fashioned woman, the type who only talks about cakes, prayers, needle and thread. But they started to realize that behind my gentle voice was a strength no storm had managed to break, and they began asking me for advice. Asking, "And when you felt sad, what did you do?" And I answered, "I stayed on my feet, even if I was trembling." Some people in the village came just to say, "Miss Maria, I always knew you were strong, but now I understand you were the foundation." And that, my dear, is worth more than a medal, more than a tribute, because that kind of recognition doesn't need a trophy, only truth. They started calling me matriarch, woman of wisdom. And me? I kept sweeping the house, making coffee, tending to the flowers, because a woman's worth isn't in what she changes, it's in what she holds together. The world finally saw. It saw what had always been there, quiet, hidden, stitched between the days. It saw that the name he left behind was just a facade. The one who held the home, the story, the memory, was me. And I didn't have to shout, nor impose myself, nor tear anyone down. I simply lived, with truth, with steadiness, with love. 10. Today, sitting here with all my white hair and fingers bent from time, I think, I think about everything I've lived, everything I endured, everything I built. And you know what amazes me most? That even after all the pain, I don't regret being who I was. I wasn't perfect, no. There were days I wanted to disappear, nights I cried in secret so no one would know, thoughts that only God and I ever knew. But I was whole, even when I felt in pieces. I look back and see the woman I was, the girl who dreamed of a garden, who believed in love, who stitched hope with thin thread, the young woman who gave up parts of herself to care for others, the mother who gave all she had, and then invented more love when it seemed she had none left. And the wife? Yes, I was. I was the woman of a man who thought he was king of everything, and I let him. But I let him, not out of submission, but out of generosity. Because women carry a strength the world still doesn't know how to name, the strength to hold up what they love, even when they're not seen. Many people say I was strong, but let me tell you a secret. I wasn't always. Some days, the only reason I didn't fall was because I didn't have time. Some moments, the strength was just on the outside. Inside, I had already collapsed. And even so, I kept going. Because there were children to feed, clothes to wash, prayers to whisper. And because deep down, I knew I couldn't let go of the reins. If I did, everything would unravel. Today, I see that my worth isn't in the pretty words people say, nor the praise that came later. It's in the silence I endured, the weight I carried in silence, the faith I never let die. It's in the way I loved, quiet, steady, present. And if I could go back, I wouldn't change everything. Maybe I would have said no more often. Maybe I would have danced more in the rain, sung more to myself, written more letters no one would read. But I wouldn't erase my story, because it was in that story that I was made. It was through it that I learned the world doesn't give us value. We have to remember who we are. And today, I remember, with clarity, with peace. If he were here, he might still think he won. But I know, it was me who held everything together. 11. So that's it, my dear. You asked me where all that strength came from, and I've told you, but true strength, it's not shouting, not a firm hand, not a harsh word. Strength is going on, even when the soul begs you to stop. It's loving without getting anything back. It's rising every morning knowing no one may notice, and doing it anyway. I'm no heroine, no saint, just a woman who lived as so many others lived, quiet, steady, sometimes forgotten, but never empty. And you know what's most beautiful? That today, even with worn hands, wrinkled skin, and memories more vivid than the days themselves, I still have something to teach, not with fancy words, but with what remains. If you pay attention, you'll see it. The food that tastes like care, the flower that blooms where no one expects, the gaze that comforts, even in silence, all of it. That's my way of continuing. That's what I leave behind. Because in the end, my child, what we leave to the world is not the grand things. It's the details, it's the ways, it's the silences that held the walls together. It's the small gestures that taught love. He died thinking he had won, and that's okay. Let him think it. But today, Everyone knows who truly owned it all. And if someday someone asks who I was, let them say this: she was the root, she was the home, she was the ground beneath it all. And may I bloom again in the hearts of those who come after. Even in silence, even if no one notices, because a woman made of truth never disappears. She plants and remains, even after she's gone. If you liked Grandma's story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you can hear more stories like this and share them with other people who might be inspired by this story of overcoming. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been in a similar situation? How did you react? A kiss on the heart from all of you. And until the next story.